The goal in your life is not to figure out how to be comfortable in your mental prisons, but to realize that you have the keys to set yourself free.
Hey everybody, welcome to the program. It's Tim Shurr here, and I'm super excited to have this amazing guest with us today. Shapiro is here. Steven, yay! Woo! Steve is a super awesome guy. He is like the king of the king of innovation, right? He's definitely one of the top speakers in the world, and he really dials in on how to be more innovative and how to draw that innovation out of you on a daily basis, which has helped companies around the country to be able to really supercharge their teams and be more profitable and have better collaboration. And he's written a bunch of books. He's got a new one coming out. The book that I like is Best Practices Are Stupid. And we're going to talk about that and what he means by it. And he's got a new book that's coming out called Invisible Solutions, which I love that because I'm always talking about how to take the unconscious and make it conscious so you can do something with it. And so he's spoken around the world, and he's been with Accenture. He has tenure there, and he writes regularly for Inc. magazine. And if I told you all the accolades, we'd spend the entire show doing that. So I'm just going to say, Steve, welcome to the program.
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you, and so are our listeners. So let me ask you, you've been working with innovation for a long time, and that's your shtick, and you've written books on it. You were the authority on this. Is that how you started?
No, actually, I didn't start with innovation. I started with what would be, back in the day, was called business process reengineering, which was really about optimization rather than innovation. We helped companies become more efficient. And unfortunately, I woke up one day and realized that in the process of helping companies optimize their processes, they would downsize their workforce. And I woke up and realized, this is not the contribution I want to make to the world. I wanted to help companies grow, not shrink. I wanted to create jobs, not eliminate jobs. And that's basically how I got into innovation 25 years ago.
Wow, that's great. So yeah, I love that right off the bat, understanding what our values are and being driven by a sense of mission and passion and purpose instead of just, how do I make some money? And so I love that. That's awesome. So, so is there a difference between optimization and innovation?
I mean, innovation sometimes can be used to optimize because efficiency can be a form of innovation. But what ended up happening was this thing called business process reengineering, which was about optimizing processes. It's when we started doing it, the goal wasn't to use it as an excuse for downsizing, but that's what it became ultimately.
Right.
CEOs, I remember one project I was working on, the CEO said, okay, great, we're doing this big re-engineering project, 10,000 people will lose their job. That was supposed to make the shareholders happy because they were cutting costs at a time that they needed to, but clearly those 10,000 lives were negatively impacted.
Yeah.
So my philosophy on innovation is it's about growth rather than shrinking. And so they're opposite sides of the same coin in some respects. It's all about business improvement. But the question is, are you going for the top line or the bottom line? I always look at the top line. How do we sell more? How do we retain our customers? How do we create an environment where we're able to differentiate and compete in an environment of commoditization? That to me is what innovation is about, is staying relevant. Efficiency is about squeezing lemons. Innovation is about growing lemons.
Outstanding. I love the distinction. That's yay. You get a sticker. That's awesome. That's really good. I like that a lot. So you came up with your book title, right? Where creativity is stupid. And you talk about that in your keynote. So tell me about that a little bit. Why do you think that creativity might be holding back people from actually growing in the way that you're describing?
Yeah, so the book is actually called Best Practices Are Stupid.
Yes.
However, I also think creativity is killing innovation. So
yes,
you're right on both accounts. You just sort of blended the two together. So first of all, about best practices, I think one of the challenges that we have in adopting somebody else's best practice is, first of all, just because it worked for another company doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Culture matters, context matters. There's so many different factors. So a lot of people like to look at what Amazon or Apple's doing, and Most companies out there don't have those resources. They don't have that culture. They don't have that bandwidth. So you have to make different decisions based on your situation. But I think the bigger issue is that best practices aren't necessarily even best practices, because there's something called the undersampling of failure. And basically what that means is that when people talk about their best practices, that's the 1 or 2 companies that try to practice and it worked. But we never hear about the failures, the 100 companies that did exactly the same thing and yet did not achieve the results.
Yeah.
And so companies think they know what caused their success, but it might be a correlation or coincidence and not a causation. And that's why best practices aren't always the best way to go.
Well, I agree. And of course, that's like a company-wide blind spot. So just the idea that we think this is what's really making us good. Just like a lot of times when people are really successful and they're very aggressive and they're very high energy and they're not taking feedback from others, and they don't want to be coachable because they're afraid that if they give up that power, that control, that somehow they're going to lose that driving force that made them successful, even if they're leaving a wake of collateral damage in the form of relationships. They still won't let it go because they think this is what's making it happen for me. And the fact that you can take somebody and say, well, wait a second, maybe that's not exactly what it is. And even if it is, you could reach a whole other potential if you are taking your team with you. So it's very powerful. Now, I want to point out too, for everybody that's listening, when you're listening to somebody who's an authority on something and they're teaching something, there's 2 types of people. There's the people that teach it, and then there's the people who live it. And so I can tell you already, Steve, that you're someone who lives it, because 1, you started out by talking about making a difference and figuring out how you want to provide value. The second thing you did was, as soon as I made my mistake and took 2 different ideas and blended them together, what you did was you saved me. Right? You said, oh, it's okay. You were right in both ways. And we do that. And actually it's this and it's this and it's this. And that's another thing that I point out a lot of times when you're communicating with people. Always look for a chance to help them feel good. Always look for a chance, if they make a mistake, to try to do something to lift them up and keep things moving in the right direction. And so that was an example, a living example, that if you go back and you listen to this interview, I want you to notice and catch what Steve did when I mixed up those things, because that is leadership in action. So, all right, we continue.
Well, but I do want to say that I do think that, coming back to where we were just a few minutes ago, I do think that creativity is negatively impacting innovation. That, in fact, that's a cornerstone of my philosophy on innovation, is that we don't need more ideas. So what ends up happening is companies say, give me your ideas. They create suggestion boxes. They create idea management systems, and they get thousands of ideas and they implement 2. Yeah. We don't need more ideas. And this concept of creativity, which tends to be thinking outside the box and thinking broadly and generating lots of ideas, is hurting innovation because it is not efficient. What we want to do is actually focus on well-framed challenges, identify the problems, the opportunities, and the issues that, if we solve them, will create the greatest value. And if we do that, now we can really unleash the greatest potential of an organization. So I do think that creativity is stupid in many respects, because I do think it's killing innovation.
So that is really interesting, because that whole quality control idea and the suggestion box and everybody being responsible for offering ideas for how to improve operational excellence and efficiency in what you're doing. What you're saying is that we need to ask better questions in order to find more specific answers to the problems that we have, as opposed to people just randomly throwing things out that can end up being a distraction.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. I mean, basically what ends up happening is, if you think about the concept of a suggestion box where people are just throwing their ideas in there, what ends up happening is, on average, based on all of my years of working with companies, is the implementation rate is well under 1% of ideas that are submitted. Mm-hmm. And that 1% actually tend to have low value relative to, hey, let's identify a really important problem that we need to solve. So this focus on ideas is the wrong thing. And so one of the things which I did a number of years ago is, so I used that business process reengineering mindset that I had, which was all about optimizing business processes.
Yeah.
And I stepped back and I said, well, how can I use that same technique to optimize the innovation process? And that's what I ended up doing, is saying, well, where's all the waste in the innovation process? How do we make it more efficient? How do we get better results, more predictable results with less effort? And that's where we came up with something I call challenge-centered innovation, where it starts with a question and results in value.
So challenge-centered innovation. So can you give us a couple of ideas and steps for how to start to put that process into action?
Sure. So the first thing you need to do is I believe that you need to innovate where you differentiate. And basically what I mean by that is you can't be the best at everything.
Right.
So what we need to do is figure out, where are we going to invest our money? And what ends up happening is, a lot of times in the name of innovation, we look at everything as an opportunity. Everything's not an opportunity. I mean, yes, it might be an opportunity for improvement, but it's not necessarily an opportunity for innovation. So the first thing is to figure out, how do you differentiate? Why do people do business with you and not someone else? What is the reason you stand out in a crowded market? And now put your energies into innovating there. And from there, you then identify, well, what opportunities do we have in that space? And then once you do that, instead of asking employees for their ideas, you ask them to solve those problems, which then increases collaboration, reduces wasted energy, and gives you, we found on average, a 10-fold improvement on your innovation ROI, because you eliminate all the wasted energy in the process.
So that's very innovative. That's a really great idea. I was just talking to a company president the other day, and he said, it's funny, we're doing a leadership program, and he's got 26 people that lead these different organizations within the one. And we were talking, and he says, it's funny because every department head thinks that they're an expert in everybody else's department. You know, so if you're having a discussion around IT and you're in finance, all of a sudden you think you're an expert in IT, you know, so what you should really do is be an expert in your zone and in your field, and trust the other experts, right? And trust that if this is what they do, trust what they're doing. And so not trying to be an expert in everything, not recognizing your limitations or where your strengths are. So what do you think about the idea of like strength finders and focusing on your strengths versus your weaknesses? Have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so actually I have my own version of, I wouldn't call it Strengths Finders because it's a totally different tool, but I've actually got something that happened to happen sitting right next to me. It's just a deck of cards. And
Yes,
on the deck of
personality
cards,
poker.
personality poker, there's words on each of the cards. So this one is the daring card, and this one is the driven card. And my thought is, everybody needs to play to their strong suit, which basically means that you want to do what you do best as an individual. It's also what companies need to do, is play to their strong suit. But teams need to play with a full deck. And this is where I think most of the personality assessments and things like that sort of miss the boat a little bit. Is it's not about the individual. It's not about who you are. It's actually about who you are not. Because if you understand who you are not, it tells you what your blind spots are. And when you understand your blind spots, now it tells you who you need to collaborate with. So I think that's really important for us to understand at a personality level. Where do we play best? And personality poker is specifically designed for innovation, because the 4 suits link back to 4 styles, which link back to 4 steps of the innovation process. Because each of us contribute to innovation, we just contribute in different ways.
Oh my gosh. All right. So for everybody that's happened to watch this interview on YouTube right now, Tim's taking notes again. So whenever I start taking notes again, I'm like, oh my God, that's a golden nugget. So that was huge, what you just said. So I'm going to repeat it again because I loved it. So, because I'm all about blind spots. I mean, my whole career is helping people figure out what their blind spots are and upgrade their beliefs. And so that is really good. So when you take a personality test, or you're really not looking at just who you are, but you're looking at who you're not. Oh, that's so good, Steve. And then it helps you recognize what your blind spots are. So immediately I started thinking about my wife and I, right? And so, you know, I'm not very as detailed, obviously, from some of these questions. And so, but I can shoot from the hip and make things happen. But my wife is very detailed. And so I used to get frustrated because I wish she was more relaxed like me. And now she's such an asset, right? The fact that she isn't like me is such a gift for me to be able to, thank God I'm not fully in charge. I would have messed the whole thing up because her ability, you know, what I am not is very detailed in the way that she is. I mean, relentlessly detailed, going through it over and over, which means she makes better choices when she finally moves. And I'm doing a lot of correcting things as I go along. And so that's my blind spot. and then recognizing that allows me to collaborate greater with my wife. And then it looks at, then it's because we're different. That's what makes us so powerful and strong. And if it was up to me originally, it wouldn't have been that way.
Well, there's. Let me just take what you just said, because there's so much in what you just said right now that's so powerful. The first thing is, the person you like the least is the person you need the most. At least that's one of my beliefs. Is that, we hear the expression "opposites attract." The evidence, the science tells us that opposites detract.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be with people who are similar to us. So in the workplace in particular, we hire people who fit the mold, people who are similar to our culture. The problem is, if you only hire people who fit the mold, eventually the organization is going to grow mold, because you don't have that diversity of experiences. So what you described with your wife is, you're a diamond in personality poker. She's a club in personality poker. These are the opposites. You're the idea guy. You're spontaneous. You like novelty. But without the person who's going to make things reality, then you're lost. And that's the same with me. Is I'm a diamond. I love new experiences. I love new ideas. I love chasing bright, shiny objects.
Yeah.
And when I've not partnered with the right people in my business, I got nothing done. I had a lot of ideas, but none of them got implemented. So that, to me, is the fundamental aspect of personality poker. Is it helps you drive a high-performing innovation team by helping you figure out what your blind spots are.
Woo, so good, man. So good. Brother Steve, preaching on. So, so I love that. A lot of times people will think that their opposites attract, but it's not your opposite that attracts. We tend to attract, especially in relationships. And I remember the first time I told my wife this, which was like one of the stupidest things I've ever done. And that's saying a lot. But I remember I heard somebody say that we don't attract our soulmates, we attract our wound mates. So when we attract the people that have similar things, like if I don't like conflict, then I'll attract somebody in my life that has a lot of energy or drama, right? And then they get bigger, and then I get more aloof, and then they feel, that they're attracting somebody who they can't get the approval from, and so it creates this dynamic, this unconscious dynamic, and we do it in work too, but that's not our opposite. That's someone who's completing a pattern that we're running, a same pattern that they, a similar pattern that they had growing up as well. So, but when we take it back into the workplace, what we're talking about is, birds of a feather do flock together. We like people who are like us, and that's why diversity is so powerful. I've been in seminars where we were supposed to, connect with a stranger to do an exercise, and we were supposed to connect with someone who we thought we would never have anything in common with. And I remember being so judgmental, looking around the room with this kind of arrogant attitude, and then looking and seeing somebody, I'm like, well, I'd probably never connect with them. So I went right towards them, and it was kind of funny because it seemed like they were coming right towards me too. and then we connected, and we thought, well, we'll just see what happens. And once we let go of the arrogance or our biases, our judgments, and we started actually trying to learn from one another, I learned so much stuff from this person that I could have never gotten, if I would have went to somebody else if I would have went to you, right? Hang out with you, we would have had a blast, but I would have never gotten, the other side of it that I did from working with this other person. So I believe in the power of diversity.
Yeah, and it's interesting though. I think one of the reasons why a lot of diversity programs haven't delivered what they need to deliver is they focused too much on the diversity angle and not enough on the appreciation angle. And
Nice.
what I mean by that is, we know that if we pull together heterogeneous teams with people with different personalities, different styles, different perspectives, different experiences, and we don't give them the tools to communicate, and we don't have a process for having them appreciate, it becomes dysfunctional, because people will argue with each other. People don't see each other, not willing to get past their own biases, as you pointed out. So part of making diversity work, and that's one of the parts of personality poker is about diverse personalities, is it's not just about saying, okay, well, we're going to slam together 4 people with 4 different perspectives. We're also now going to give you the tools so that each person understands why the other person is so fundamentally critical to your success and how to work with that person. That's the key to making diversity work, because without it, you just end up with a lot of people and conflict.
And that's why everybody listening should go to personalitypoker.com and order your deck of cards. Well, you get 5 of them, but everybody should go right now to personalitypoker.com and grab that, because it will give you the tools and the strategies that Steve just described, because that is exactly right. If you just think you're going to put different people together in a room and say, all right, now be innovative, then and without giving them the support, without show coaching them, without setting the ground rules and the boundaries and showing them how to win, which most people don't know how to win. So they just kind of go step 1, step 2, step 3, and they just keep messing up the steps as they go. First, I don't want to work with everybody that disagrees with me. Okay, all right, now I'm going to get together with them. Then, all right, well, now we're going to sit in the room, but we don't really have the rules, so we're just going to start going at it. And someone's going to shut down, and someone's going to get you out loud, and someone's going to point fingers, and someone's going to get defensive, and so it just doesn't work out. So, you know, every phase of this growth, you're going to deal with the resistance part. And if you have the tools for the rules of engagement, then it makes everything more effective. And one of the fastest ways of doing that is getting those personality poker cards, because it makes it easier. So that's pretty cool. So as you're going through coaching all these teams and doing all these keynotes and sharing things, what's some of the resistance that comes up? Because I talk about a resistance a lot in this program, where as soon as you have a goal or a hope or a dream, you get the resistance that shows up right along with it. And so is there some resistance that you commonly see, and how might you get through that or help others get through that?
There's quite a bit, and it really depends on the situation. I think you'll love this study. There's a study that was done not too long ago by Cornell University, and what they did was they asked executives in companies, their thoughts on creativity and innovation. Do you embrace it? Do you need it? Do you want it? And every single one they talked to said, yes, we need it, we love it, we want it, we embrace it, we need to have it. And then they used, I'm sure it's something you're familiar with, the implicit association test, which is a test developed by Harvard to assess the unconscious biases that we have. And what they did was they correlated a long series of words with creativity and innovation. And the 3 words that were most highly correlated to the words creativity and innovation were agony, pain, and vomit.
Oh my God.
And so you get people who at a conscious level say, yes, I want this, but our survival instinct deep down inside of us kicks in. And what ends up happening is we have this conflict, because change and innovation and creativity are unpredictable and ambiguous. And because of that, it feels like it threatens our survival. And so that's one of the things to overcome. And first of all, pointing out some of these biases that we have is the first step in understanding. It's like, look, you say you want it, but I guarantee you, here's what's really going on. So that's the first step. The second step is to, the other bias, which I think is really interesting, is confirmation bias. And this to me is just one of the most deadly things when it comes to innovation. We joke and say that, yeah, but is the enemy of innovation, when in fact it's the, wow, this is a great idea. Because if you believe your idea is a great idea and you are the person testing out your idea, which is typically how it works out, you have an idea, you'll be the person to help bring it forward. Mm-hmm. Confirmation bias kicks in, and basically you will only see the evidence that supports your belief, and anything that contradicts your belief will be rejected by your brain. So we end up implementing and moving forward with ideas that should have been killed a long time ago. So there's just so many, and pointing out these biases is part of it. I've got a number of tools that I use. So it's the brain to me is so fascinating when it comes to innovation, because it's not wired for innovation. It's actually wired for survival as its primary function.
Which is brilliant, which is why we have the prefrontal lobes to help us realize that, we don't want to just survive, we want to thrive. And in order to do that, we have to unlearn and then relearn using the things that you're sharing with us. So if the next time you're watching a political show, no matter what side of the fence you're on, remember confirmation bias. Mm-hmm. Because you'll see all these political parties, pointing fingers back into each other. Nobody's helping each other. Everybody's trying to tear each other down. It's been like that for a long, long time, and it seems to be getting worse. So, I have a friend that says when you're her name's Ava Youngblood, and she says that when when you're working with somebody and you're disagreeing with them, you know, a very powerful phrase is, you know, you could be right. Could be right. Because it keeps us open to staying curious and seeking first to understand than being understood. And then all of a sudden you have the ability to maybe learn something new that you could, you know, pay attention to. A lot of times when I have ideas, I think they're right, but I don't really care if they are. I just want the feedback to figure out. I'm past the ego or needing to be right or significant, because, you know, I know most of the time I'm not. And so I got to make sure that I welcome feedback. I don't think of it as a criticism. In fact, Ava, she also said that she does a lot of work with helping people come together. And she says that the younger generations do not like the word diversity and inclusion. It's a negative connotation that goes along with that, and they're not into it at all. They don't even like the words. And so it's interesting, these biases that we have. It's fascinating. So when you are working with people and they're having this resistance, how do you help them get through it? Is it just awareness? Are you taking them through experiences that create these aha moments? Or is there some challenge? Everybody does it a little bit different. What's your approach to helping people to overcome their own resistance?
Yeah, so I think it's three different pieces. Number one is I have a series of experiences and experiments that I do with people, because I can tell them their brain is doing something, but when they actually do, and these experiments are really fast. I can do them with thousands of people at the same time, but they're like, they get to see that their brain works differently than they thought their brain worked. And I could tell them that all day long, but when you actually have that visceral experience, I find that people will be more likely to change. The second thing, as you said, we need to point out these biases. There's a lot of research, in particular with confirmation bias. It's just a constant reminder of confirmation bias, and using what you were talking about in terms of, hey, you could be right. Tools like that really does help accelerate it. And then the third one is actually a series of tools that I have. So for example, one of the biggest challenges I think companies have is asking the right questions, because I think the question is more important than the answer. Mm-hmm. But we struggle as human beings to ask better questions. And so I have a series of tools that people use. In fact, the new book that's coming out next year called Invisible Solutions, that is actually a tool with 25 different lenses that help people reframe any problem 25 different ways to help them come up with dozens and dozens of different possible solutions that they would never have considered, that were right in front of their nose, but they just couldn't see it. Oh,
that's exciting. Yeah, I think people would use those lenses if they knew what they were. And so for you to be able to put a whole bunch of them into one book that people could use as a reference tool, almost like as a compass, right? You pull out that tool and you're like, all right, how can I look at this situation 25 different ways? I mean, that's amazing. So how did you come up with all these different ways?
So I've been in the innovation space for a long time, and I've always had this fascination with the questions and the lenses. Mm-hmm. So I have a spreadsheet with like 75 different lenses. Wow. And what I did was I just sort of figured out what were the most powerful ones, which are the ones which addressed the 5 different ways that we need to look at a problem. So sometimes we need to take a big, broad, abstract problem, for example, and deconstruct it. So I have 5 lenses designed to help you take a problem like, how do we improve productivity, or how do we increase revenues, or how do we improve margins, which are big, broad questions, which are very difficult to solve because they're just so abstract, and it helps you break them down into smaller pieces. Whereas there are some questions which are designed, or some of the lenses which are designed to help you make something less specific. Because a lot of times when we're asking questions, they're solutions masquerading as questions, or questions that are so narrowly defined, we're never going to find a solution. So I've got 5 different categories of lenses, and I have 5 lenses for each of those categories. And that's how it all came about.
That makes it feel a lot more manageable. Right? When you have, when you think about 25 different ways, like, oh my gosh, right? But when you have 5 categories and then you have 5 steps for each one, that feels a lot more manageable and useful. And so that's exciting. That's really good. And that's coming out next year. So we'll have to make sure, perhaps when that book is released, we'll have you back on, and we'll make sure everybody gets a copy, because that is very, very useful to be able to grab a book, look through the lenses, ask the questions, ask your team those questions, and then boom, you know, you're starting to find better solutions right away. So that's exciting. So as you've been traveling around, were with Accenture for a long time. Any nuggets that you have, from being with that company and having all those, like 20 years of experience? Any nuggets that you walked away from that's made you feel more effective as a trainer or just better as a person?
Well, one of the opportunities I had when I was at Accenture was I was leading this global practice. It was about 20,000 people, and we were struggling to get the European arm of it really activated. So I ended up moving to London for quite a few years. And, it's one thing to visit another country. I mean, I've given speeches now in 50 different countries, but that's not the same as living somewhere. And so for me, living in London and then spending a year in Switzerland and spending a lot of time in Singapore, all these give me different perspectives on what is common amongst all human beings, but also recognizing that an American-centric view of the world is not the correct view. Everybody has different cultures, different beliefs, different biases. And that to me is so fundamentally important. So I think I would encourage everybody to live overseas if you get an opportunity. It will give you an appreciation that you've never had. And even as simple, you'd think England, where everybody in the U.S., or not everybody, but the U.S. started as basically expats from England. We speak a similar language, but we're so different. There are so many different cultural perspectives. And I would even say in the US, so I've traveled the US several times by car, just going to, most of the states, and even regions of the country are different. So we need to have an understanding of the cultural differences that people have in organizations and in countries and even regions. I think that's just so incredibly important.
Yeah. So can you give a couple examples maybe of what it's like? I know Singapore is it's like one of the most wealthiest places. So can you give a couple of ideas of some of those differences that you've seen in like Singapore or London? I would think Singapore would be more different from America than London, but I could be wrong.
Well, here's what's interesting is when I started working in London, I had a team of about 30 or 40 people that I was working directly with from across Europe. And I decided to put everybody, myself included, through cultural training. And I hired somebody who was an expert in understanding the cultures of each country. And he pulled me aside at the end and he said, just so you know, I'm going to warn you, Americans moving to England are the ones who suffer the greatest culture shock. And the reason is there's an expectation that the UK is the same as the US when in fact it's not. And so, like as a speaker, I'll just give you just very, very simply. So if I'm giving a speech in the US and I want to have engagement with the audience, I can usually expect most audiences to engage with me. They will talk back to me, and give me feedback or answer my questions and play along. In the UK, they are less likely to want to interact directly with the person on the stage, happy to work with their groups. In Asia, it's even different. They will never have an interaction with me. So you have to have now I could have a team in the UK interact with me, but the individuals not so much. And these are generalizations, of course, but I do find that the way people engage is fundamentally important. And we need to understand that we're not all the same. And look, it goes even beyond that. Introverts and extroverts are going to engage differently. Engineers are going to engage differently than people who are for advertising agencies. So I'm always hyper aware of the people that I am with. And if I'm giving a speech, I will always change my approach for that audience, understanding the cultural norms of the group.
That's right on. Understanding and then being respectful of it as well. So I was given a keynote in London and I remember a similar experience. We were supposed to get started at noon and I was ready to go and everybody else was still in the lobby having tea. And the guy that had brought me in, he's like, well, we should be getting ready pretty soon, but he wasn't going and telling anybody to come in because that would have been seen as impolite. And so he was just kind of waiting until everybody kind of moseyed in. And people didn't show up until about 12:20, before they finally sat down and I got started. And, I had the thought, which would have been a disaster, but I had the thought of, come on, guys, let's go, let's get in the room. And the guy that brought me in would have been mortified if I would have done something like that. And so my extroverted American attitude was, I'll rally them up for you. It'll be fun. And, but thank God I didn't do that. And instead I was respectful of where they were at and how they do things. And that was a powerful lesson for me. So,
And I love that word respectful, because I think that's, coming back to something you were talking about before with ego and all of that. I mean, sometimes we feel like we are right. We're the center of the universe. We know what's best. And we need to put that aside. We need to respect other people's cultures, other people's beliefs, not just in society as a whole, but, in business. Because I think when you have, let's say, a multinational, and you have a bunch of Americans and you send them over to Europe, and they start pounding the table, this is the way we do it in the US, that doesn't work. We need to appreciate and respect the way other people are. And that actually brings us in many respects back to personality poker, which is we need to respect people's differences. If you and I are these bright, shiny object chasers and somebody else is very methodical, we need to respect that that's who they are and value that's who they are. And I think that's one of the things which we often lack in organizations, is that deep respect for people who are not the same as us.
that is, yeah, it really is. So I keep having examples of everything that you're saying. And I did a whole program on silent leadership, right? And it was all because a lot of extroverts would believe that the introverts on their team wouldn't be good leaders because they weren't so outgoing and energized. And I'm like, oh, no way. They're the ones that are sitting there not saying anything, thinking things through. They've thought about it 10 million different ways than you before they actually speak. Well, we're just shooting from the hip. And so, so that is a really, it's a powerful point. So, in fact, I was working with another a president the other day, and he has a bunch of companies and serial entrepreneur. And I was trying to give him some feedback because he's like, I just get to the point. He was very type A, very A plus, right? He was very, very, and so it's what made him successful, but it's hard for other people to keep up with him on his team. And he said that I just get to the idea and I know that we need to do it. And I'm just like, we're not going to talk about it anymore because I already know the solution and we're going to go. Right. Yep. And I had to help him understand how disrespectful that was, how it was coming across. And I could see the wheels turning. He was having a hard time letting go, and buying that because he had been successful, but it was starting to sink in. He started to think of examples where he had gotten feedback from others that might have verified what I was saying to him. It's the trouble when you're in a position of power is you don't get a lot of really honest feedback from people, especially people that work for you that don't want to lose their jobs. Yeah. So Invisible, what's the title here? Invisible Solutions?
Invisible Solutions.
And that's coming out next year. So right. We're on the edge of our seat for that. And then Personality Poker, you can get your deck of cards at personalitypoker.com, and you can find out about Steve and bring him into your company events. If you just go to Shapiro.com, then it's the land of Steve, right? And you have all the cool information that you can get from him and access. So one more question. If you could, based on all the things that you've learned, and I've really, really enjoyed our conversation. This is one of my favorite ones. If you could go back and talk to that little boy that you once were and give him some advice based on what you've learned through your journey, what would you go back and tell little Steve?
Oh boy. It's a really interesting question because it's something that I've actually been thinking about a lot lately. Even though I'm sort of an idea guy, I'm actually an engineer by background. I am a nerd. When I was in high school, I was actually a member of the math club. Mm-hmm. I was in marching band. I mean, I was like the nerd of nerds, and other kids would pick on me, and I wanted to be like the cool kids, and I just couldn't seem to figure out how to be that. And for me, that nerdiness has actually helped me be who I am, though, by instead of, trying to ignore it, which I've spent most of my life trying to do, when I recognize that has actually, like my whole innovation process, it's an engineering approach. It's not around, sitting on the beach and smoking a joint and looking at the clouds and coming up with ideas. No, it is an engineering approach. It's an engineered approach to innovation. So I guess no matter who you are, whatever you were when you were younger may be a key to your success if you embrace it. And that's something which my wife is always so great at reminding me, is I didn't like being the nerd growing up. I wanted to fight it, but she's the one who's like, if you embrace it, you'll be a better person. And that's definitely been the truth.
Oh, well, that's exactly right. Loving and accepting yourself for who you are. And, you know, that idea of nerd is funny because people have changed the meaning of it. You know, nerds rule the world now, right? And in a lot of ways, right? When you're smart and you're talented and you're sharp with math and you can think things through and you can play a musical instrument, I mean, that's all pretty amazing and cool. And the idea that we somehow think that that's not. It's funny because it's like reverse. It's reverse now. My kids are going to a school where it's very diverse. So there's a lot of Asian kids. There's a lot of kids from India, and so they are top high performers and very, very competitive. And so my two kids with the blonde hair and blue eyes are there, and you know, it's funny because the kids are making fun of each other based on what the grades are, right? And as opposed to whether they play sports or anything. It's a very strange experience, but it also lets me know that no matter where you're at, there's going to be people that that are going to support you and people that are going to try to knock you down. And if someone's trying to knock you down or they don't see your worth or your value, it's probably because they don't feel it in themselves. I've never met anybody that was happy that felt like they had to hurt somebody else's feelings.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you could go back and say, hey, you know what? You're pretty amazing. And you should own that and love who you are, accept who you are, embrace it, and grow forward. And because believe me, things are going to work out for you.
Yeah. And it comes back to something you were saying before is, you know, our partners, they see things about ourselves that we don't. And it's always good to have somebody who's that mirror. And I'm just, you know, so blessed to have a person who's a fantastic mirror and ridiculously smart and can show me things about myself that have been my blind spots. And so I think that, you know, choose the right partner is so important.
Oh, it certainly is. Behind every great man is a great woman, you know, and an even better woman. And so, so that's good. I'm glad you found yours. I'm glad I found mine, and for everybody else. And remember, when I say I found mine, it's not just that I found this woman who is just absolutely fabulous. So what I've done is try to find the solutions for how to make our relationship fabulous. And so, because it never comes easy. I don't know how it is for you, Steve, but it is working continually to strengthen the relationship and strengthen the relationship I have with myself and then with my wife. And so I find that's so important. It's funny we talk about this all of a sudden just because so many people that I coach for business, we end up talking about their marriages or their kids. You know, we're not just, you know, just these, you know, human beings are focused only on trying to make money and be successful at work. You know, we really got to take a look at all the areas of our life and find a way to feel peaceful and recognize the blind spots and biases that we have everywhere in our life. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you so much. Any final thoughts that you might have that you want to share with our audience?
I think we covered a lot here today. I think that I guess the last thought I would just have is, you know, we were talking about expertise earlier, and, you know, it is important for us to have expertise. On the other hand, at times expertise can be the enemy of innovation, and because sometimes the best ideas come from outside your industry or outside your function or outside your area of expertise. And so one of the things which I always encourage people to do is to, if you are, you know, in the hospitality industry and you're in the sales function, don't just learn from others in the hospitality industry. Don't just learn from people who are sales experts. Go to other industries, go to other functions and learn what you can from people who are similar enough to what you're doing, but in fundamentally different places. And I find that's sometimes my greatest growth is not learning from other innovation people, but learning from others like magicians and things like that. So I think that's always very useful.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Going to a conference that's not particularly in your industry, right? So when I first started speaking, I joined Meeting Planners International. I wanted to understand how everybody else was thinking and what they felt about speakers showing up. And I found that a lot of them don't want the speaker that's over the top, hey, how you doing? You should pick me. They're like, oh my gosh, right? And so yeah, I think that that's a solid advice. So everybody that's listening, make sure that you check out Shapiro.com or check out the Invisible book or the Invisible Solutions book that's coming out real soon, and personalitypoker.com. Check that all out. I'll have it in the show notes. Steve, thanks so much for dropping all this wisdom and for being a mesmerizing guest today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much, Tim.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for listening, because of course, this program is for you, right? It's designed to help you to live your life to the best that you can be, so that you can walk around feeling mesmerizing as well. So thanks so much for being here. We'll catch you next time. Make sure that you share this episode with 3 of your friends, because they will get so much from the knowledge and wisdom that Steve shared with us today. So make sure you blast that out to everybody you know, and make today a sure success. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Hey, would you like more free tips on how to be a mesmerizing leader? Then check out mesmerizingleadership.com, and also hang out with me on Facebook, facebook.com/Tim Shurr. Thanks so much, and make your day a sure success.